if I submitted an album that had no names or nothing, it was just a blank CD, which I've thought about doing many times, you know, the record company would, you know, Pierre would pull the rest of his hair out, you know. Some people have this image that, first of all, some people think it's jazz, you know, and then they have this image of what they think a jazz musician should be. Just some guys smoking pot who just plays free and plays off a feeling or whatever. Some people think that, you know, that's what it should be. And then when they see that you're thinking about something or something like this, they say, oh no, I don't like that image. And then they don't like the music anymore, you know, because they don't like this idea of somebody who thought about what they did, you know. They say this music should just be free and should just be, even though they're not musicians, that's their idea, you know. It should just be free and just be playing and blah, blah, blah. No, nobody, you know, nobody's doing that. There's no human beings that are going around not thinking, you know. Technical part of the music is, it can be explained that I can go into some things and everything, but that's not, you know, that's not the point. The point is not the technical stuff. The point is the sound and how people receive it in terms of their intuition and in terms of their emotion, in terms of, you know, intellect, whatever, you know, but not necessarily from a musician standpoint where I want to break down everything or something like that. That's not the point. Because there's nothing you can say really. I mean, I can talk to somebody in my band about this stuff on a technical level. They may not be tuned into the symbolic level. They just may want to know, like a Sean Rickman or somebody like that, you know, where do I play, where do I come in, where do I go out, blah, blah, blah. They may not be interested in all the other stuff, you know. Many times I give clinics, guys in the band get up and walk away. They say, oh man, here we go again. This long thing, you know. So they might not want to know about that. Then again, people might want to know about that and not want to know the stuff that Jonathan and Tom and Sean and them know. You know, they might not want to know that stuff. It's too much for them anyway, because it took those guys years to understand that. Most of the movements that I have are still based on the classical movements. Most of the things I'm dealing with fifths and thirds in some kind of form or another. You know, I mean, there's like a lot of inverted intervals and things like that, but most of the movements deal with that kind of thing. You know, they still deal with this big matrix of these different kinds of dominant and subdominant movements, you know. But it's really expanded, you know. So other people have done this, Bartok, different people from the past, Bach, you know, Coltrane, a lot of people, you know. So I just try to do it in my own way. But most of the movements are based on that. Because for me, still the strongest, well, it's hard to say, but there's a certain kind of motion in music, both tonally and rhythmically. There's a way to make a sound that sounds like it wants to move to something else. You know, it sounds rather unstable and sounds like it wants to be resolved or changed or mutated or whatever you want to say. You know, move to something else that's more stable and everything. And basically, I'm researching and dealing with these kinds of sounds to simulate the animation part that's in the world, you know. I mean, basically I think of life as animation. And so I'm using that to simulate the life. A life is a kind of an unfolding of various processes and everything. And so I try to match that in the music. I'm more interested in the motion of things. I'm interested in the structures too, but I'm interested more in the motion and how things move and how they unfold and everything, you know. So a lot of my study in the ancient music and all that kind of stuff is to see what were the origins of these different types of unfoldings and these different types of unbindings, mutations, progressions, whatever you want to call them, and how people did these things and how people thought of them, you know. So I'm looking at that mainly. The triad mutations, like I said, I kind of had this Trinity idea in my head. Not necessarily religious like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, but basically what that represents. You know, not thinking of it in terms of God or anything like this, but thinking of it from a nature standpoint in terms of what that represents. You know, so I think of a lot of Trinity things. I think of a lot of duality type things and things like that in terms of concepts. But I also think of how these things move and how they change from one form to the next. And it's the change thing that interests me, because for me that's what symbolizes or imitates the process of life. I see improvisation as being important to that, because life has form and all of that, and we have form inside our improvisations and all this kind of stuff, but it's not predictable. You know, it's not a predictable form, at least not from our level. And so, you know, for me, improvisation is a good analogy for that. I like to do something that even I haven't done. It's really, really challenging, you know, I mean, for us, you know, and we're forming things in the moment and all that kind of stuff. It's not one's better than the other, it's just a different approach. I think I have an idea before everybody I play with, because I usually pick people I play with, you know. And so you may think you have an idea with Tyshawn or with Sarah or with Nelson or whoever, but until you play with them, you know, you don't know anything. You know, I mean, how it's going to work, how it's going to work out. Only after you do it do you know. You know, before that, it's just something that you speculating can happen usually based on hearing them play another music. You know, I mean, and you speculate on what it could be like them playing whatever you're going to play, because most of the time I don't even know what I'm going to play when I'm choosing somebody to play with, you know. I mean, I didn't know when I asked Sarah and Malik to do this thing, I didn't know what I was going to do at that point. You know, everything wasn't like composed already or whatever, you know. I mean, there were some things I was still doing right in Brazil. Almost all that music I wrote, some of it I wrote before, like the da 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 da, you know, well, that song we did with Jeff Watts and those guys. I just did a different version, and it kept expanding and all this kind of stuff. And that's sort of the theme of the whole CD, you know. Still want to try some things. It's like the things I tried with Sarah and Malik and those guys too. You know, I know that they're from a very different culture and they have a very different background. You know, I mean, you didn't ask me about Malik, but let's take that example. See, different people have learned different things. Exactly the tradition and the things that Jeff Watts is strong at is exactly what Malik doesn't know. Exactly what Malik is strong at is exactly what Jeff doesn't know. You know, for example, you know. And I can say the same thing for so many people. I can say the same thing for Tyshawn or for Sean or for Daphne's. Excuse me. All these people, they really are from different traditions, and they really know different things. Yeah, it's time for the water.
Yeah, just a blue folder, you know, one of those plastic folders. Just blue plastic, just in case you run across them.
Okay. And they really know different things, and so I'm kind of like a chef who's working with assistants from different places. You know, I mean, you know, and I have to still make a meal. You know, with this guy who understands this way of cooking, this guy who understands another way of cooking, and something like this. And so I had to figure out how to integrate and how to make the thing a whole and everything. And for me, that's almost as big as a challenge as playing the music itself. You know, is trying to figure out how to make something work, knowing this guy has this kind of information in this area, and this guy has another kind of information in another area. You know. I don't want to just have a small, really close group of people. So, you know, sometimes I want to bring in some string players or some other vocalists or some other people from other situations and everything to integrate that in to expand the sound, you know. And usually I keep the core musicians. The only time I didn't do that was with the first Brazil session. What I did with the chart is I animated it, meaning that, you know, the chart, I mean, it's too much to explain again. You know, the chart has certain aspects and things like that, and I animated the aspects, I animated the angles between the different planets and things like that, and then expressed it as music, you know. So for me, the chart is in motion, it's moving. It's not just a fixed thing, you know, like it is when Tom looks at it or something like that. You know, it's something that's in motion. But those sections at the end of everywhere where it says astrology 1, astrology 2, astrology 3, or astrology anything, you know, at the end of that song, and you can hear where it changes, you know, at the end of that song there's a section with trumpet, trombone, voice, and saxophone. That's, you know, without bass and without drums, that's the section that represents the astrology part.
人生在世不曾遇，明朝善法弄扁舟。
Same thing for the song that's called numerology. It's exactly the same thing. Only difference is instead of using astrology, I use numerology, you know, to form it. But other than that, it's and numerology is something that, again, is very, very old, that people have been using for a long time. You know, they found stuff in Bach. You know, I found stuff in Coltrane. They found stuff in Schoenberg and some of these guys, you know, using. A lot of composers have used numerological stuff in their music, and a lot of some improvisers have used it too. So that part of it's old. The whole point to all these things is how do you use it and what do you do? Because there's an infinite number of ways that you can use something like that. You know, and the big question everybody always asks is, well, how do you use it or what do you do? Well, you know, the how for all this stuff is not simple. You know, for example, if I were just to play Charlie Parker tune, and somebody would have come up and asked me who didn't know music, how is that formed? You know, you wouldn't be able to answer them. I mean, it doesn't matter how old it is or whatever, you wouldn't be able to answer them because there's too many things you have to say to answer that. The person doesn't know music, you know, so what can you say? Now, if you're talking to somebody who knows a great deal of music, then you have a certain point that you can start from that's up here, and then you can go from there. You know, the more they know, the higher up you can start, you know. But still, it's going to take a long time, you know, to explain. The way it's built and the way I organize CDs is the same way I organize music. You know, whether it's rhythms or pitches or chords or forms or whatever. I organize the CD the same way. Jen asked me this recently, and first of all, I do it spontaneously. You know, I don't do it ahead of time. You know, I just do it spontaneously. And second of all, it's like a improvisation kind of the way I do it, and it usually has a form that's something like the other forms I have. Most of my forms have something to do with symmetry or some kind of inner form that is expanded outward. You know, that's the basic thing. So this, for example, this Gregorian here is balanced out by this glyphs that's here. This tetragram here is balanced out by this trigram here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a trigram here in section 5. There's a tetragram here, you know, in section 1. So those are balancing each other out. And then these are balancing each other out. There's a glyphs in motion here, and there's a Gregorian here. They're kind of balancing each other out. Here, I mean, and there's little things too, like there's a ballad here, this thing here, and this Tehu 6 here. I kind of balance each other out. So there's sort of these forms within forms and everything. And I saw Li Bai as the center thing of this whole thing, you know, because it's the piece that's most unlike anything else, you know. So that's sort of the axis around which the whole thing swirls. Now, why there's so many rituals is because for me there's 5 sections. Even though it's over 2 CDs, I consider it being 5 sections. You know, I think the third ritual, it doesn't come out that way balanced on the CDs because you only have 2 CDs. So that's the problem. But in my head, in terms of the compositions and everything, there are 5 rituals, and so that's, you have to deal with the number 5, and then there are 3 triad mutations. You have to deal with the number 3, and then there's 2 circle weavings. So you have to deal with 2. That's already a golden Ming thing right there, Fibonacci thing. Just 2, 3, 5. You know. Gregorian and glyphs in motion, similar, is that they both have that positive negative motion thing happening. Gregorian has this melody, then has an upside down version of the same melody, and with all the parts related to it like that. You know, it's not done the same way as ritual, but it's not done the same way as ritual or glyphs in motion, but it's similar. So glyphs in motion has that too. First, I'll do that. Let's say. It has other parts that go along with it, but that one part is a symmetrical mirror of the other part. You know, so. The other songs have something like that too. It's more complicated in glyphs in motion, but in Gregorian it's not. Gregorian is that's the basic melody. It starts off. So if you turn it upside down, you can see that that's the same thing. Well, if somebody were to work it out, they can see it's the same thing. It's the same melody. Well, anyway, I'm not playing right, but that's the idea. And then the same thing with that song. That part by itself is not turned around, but as we get to the second part after the drum solo, the part that Jonathan and Jen are doing, the part that I'm playing is sort of a, how can I say it? It's a inverted form of that. in terms of shape, but I make some changes because of the key of it and everything. So so that song is has the same principles too. So I see those songs as being as kind of being like each other. That's a longer melody. That's pretty short, you know. And it's more notes. There's many more notes. The last one that does that is pretty complex because it has 3 parts and a very complex rhythmic part. But I'm talking about slow, which is glyphs in motion. There's that intro part which we play, and then we play that kind of, you know, improvisatory and everything with different parts coming in different places and stuff like that. Then there's a drum solo, and then and we pretty much always do it with the drum solo. And then after the drum solo, we do it in kind of a much more complicated form. It's a similar melody. It borrows from the first melody, but it's not exactly the same melody. And it has, like I said, the counter line has the shape of something being inverted, but it's not really inverted exactly like the other melodies are, you know, like Gregorian and like ritual. It makes allowances for certain key changes and things like that. Also, the bass line also has a inverted thing, because what I mean by inverted shape is people head people who we have a hub. Then the next part is speed bobble bobble bobble. It's like the opposite shape. The circle weavings and the mutations, those are really different. I mean, they go along the same principle, but they're much more convoluted. Convoluted, I guess is a word. It's kind of complex. They're much more turned in on themselves. The circle weavings. Well, let me start with the mutations. The mutations come out of these triad things, and that has more to do with kind of a trinity kind of idea. That's why I use triads, and they mutate in certain ways. You see, as I explained earlier, in the yard and earlier here, I view these sacred proportions and things like that as moving. I don't see them as something that's like a static situation. I view the dynamic part or the animating part as moving. So for me, I look at the structure of the universe like you have these different principles and these different structures and things like that. But then these principles are animated, which means that they're moving, that they have some kind of motion involved in them, you know. Circle weavings, the movements don't happen together. The movements themselves are staggered. In the circle weavings, there's no chords like this. Things are interwoven with each other in such a way that the horns, which have the harmony part, are very staggered. And the circle weavings, the bass and the voice have the melody, you know, like the one that goes la da 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 da, oh da 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 da. Da 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 da. You know, it has this melody that's kind of all over the place in terms of the rhythm and everything, because it has these rhythmic modes that we follow, and the rhythmic modes make everything sound like staggered and in different places and things like that. But there is structure to it, you know. These songs are complex in terms of the way they're formed. I mean, it's even hard for me to remember them, you know. But they're complex in terms of the way they're formed and everything. But there's only, I compose a lot of different circle weavings, but they're so complex we were only able to do 2 of them actually. The other thing with the circle weaving songs is they're modal. Well, the way we play them is modal. I mean, for me, all music is modal. But the way we play them, we play them using these we're kind of like mutating tetrachords. The tetrachord that we use in this case, I'll still do it in C. It's this, which is the only symmetrical tetrachord, because you only have 3 tetrachords. So we use this, and then we use the one a tritone away from that, which will be this. So all together is, which some people are familiar with, you know. But we don't play that as a scale. We play it as tetrachords. Tetrachords for me are like regions, you know, or things are within their regions. So you can hear that in the melody. So you hear that? That's the first melody. It's not in that key, but that's the first melody. Oh, that's really out of tune. You know, and it doesn't matter if you play in this key. It's the same melody. So all of the melodies that are being sung by Jen and Reggie, by the voice and the bass, are all off of these tetrachords. You know, sla da 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 da. You know, all those melodies are off of that tetrachord stuff.
The cycle of life reveals what we cannot clearly see. I know the nature of my soul is of light and of truth. This I know, and of all the universalized change, the only constant that is eternal speed.
It's really going to take a long time to explain to somebody who doesn't understand it, and I'm assuming that a lot of people who see this video, you know, are not musicians or whatever, and I'm not playing music for musicians. It's not my intention to play music for only people who are thinking like me. That's not my intention at all. In fact, I'm playing for people who I believe think quite differently from me.